part of the goal today is to recap last week, some of the highlights. For those who weren't aware, we had 3 days with people who were Genius Guides, plus a couple of clients came in. And one of them, a big one, was a great ad. They're one of CliftonStrengths' largest clients. They've got 23 certified CliftonStrengths coaches, and that handled 23,000 employees. Their goal, or the constraint, is get it into the operational side. So one of the things we talked about last week was the challenge that all of the different training platforms have, and that is they are content heavy, content oriented. You learn the system, you learn the strengths, you learn all of these things, but it seldom goes from understanding and insight into behavioral change and improvement and growth. So that's part of what we dealt with last week.
Can I share a quick picture?
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought this is great. So you're looking behind Rex. This is what Rex is looking at right in front of him, right? Rex, can you describe that more?
This is a cabin that was built in the 1930s. It's a little cottage. This was a park. You're overlooking a bluff to a river. The river was a place that people came for healing and medicinal purposes because of the high mineral content. So every day I get to go out to a little cottage, looking into trees and looking at my bees. And this is where the creative stuff happens.
And then the other thing is we got to see everyone's profile.
Yeah.
On calls like this, you never see a profile, right? You just see the front of their face. And you can personally, like, oh, that's what you look like from the side.
There you go. To jump into some of last week, as a reminder, our process of training is primarily learned by doing. The very first exercise we did, and part of what I want to help instill in you, is that I try to model what we teach. So when we started out by asking what was the most important thing you wanted to walk away with, you might remember everybody did the Post-it note thing, went up and put it on the board. And then who did I look for to go up there and bucket them into themes?
Those darn arrangers.
There were 3 arrangers. And you remember what Rick said. He said, even if you hadn't asked me, I would have jumped up to do it. Well, that's also tying together what the strengths are doing. These are the strongest parts of your brain that fire instinctively. There's a magical side and a survival side. So when somebody sees all of these Post-it notes that are no order at all, one of the strengths that just says, I want to take that and bring order to it, is arranger. You can imagine in the past when a facilitator gets up and says, tell me all your priorities, and writes them down, and then tries to get consensus around that, that can either go off the rails or it's hard to manage. And we had 20 people in there, so a large group trying to get on the same page of what's important to you and boil it down. So it accomplished many things. And we did take time during the workshop last week to say, now this is a facilitator tool or a facilitator trick. And so we stepped back and said, these are the things that were good about it. Everybody got to contribute, heads down. Everybody got to get their thinking out of their heads onto paper. Everybody got to get up to move. The movement around, people were meeting and introducing themselves, saying hi. And then while the 3 were putting it all together, I was doing a little bit of facilitation. And then when it came back, Rick reported out, here's the buckets. Then they boiled that down into 4 key areas. And that became, for me as a facilitator, not a roadmap, but make sure that these are the key ideas people are dealing with and checking them off. Another thing, I will often not post an agenda, which drives some people nuts. If I do post an agenda, it'll be theme oriented. But when I'm with a group of people who are high functioning leaders, I don't want to post the agenda because some of them will say, well, you skipped this one. If I go off the agenda, their anxiety goes up and they want to know why, and they want to check the box off. If you're with a group that's new to this, having a roadmap is really good to use. And I had a slide with a general roadmap that I showed. However, we got off that roadmap very early because we were following the interests of the group. I don't want to say this was group led, but it was group influenced. And we didn't stick to a certain amount of time for an exercise. It was more about the energy. If there was lots of energy, I don't know if you remember 4:30 Wednesday afternoon, it was still buzzing in the exercise. So part of what I look for are people highly engaged. Is there lots of energy? The word that was used was the collaborative hum. And we got that phrase from a superintendent, Dave Runlin from Mesquite, when we went down to a school in Corpus Christi and viewed the classes. This was in the bottom 2% of all the schools in Texas. And they had just gone through a new model of learning. It was low income, a lot of transitory workers because of the farming community. And the old model of learning wasn't working, and they adopted what's called a project-based learning model. In other words, it's a learn by doing. It's what we do. We give you an exercise and a project, throw you together, and then all these informal things such as collaboration, communication, leadership, learning how to play well together, that's all part of what's going on in the school and in what we do. That's part of the model. Now, I'll pull up a little bit of an overview from last week so we can take a look at what we've got. This was the resource link, and I want to highlight what we worked on and have you comment. We have a link here to 2 keynotes, mine, an example of a keynote, and Maddie's. And the keynote was to an audience that probably has not taken the CliftonStrengths. The Genius Spark is separate from the CliftonStrengths, but we use the CliftonStrengths to guide us faster. And I'm interested to hear what those who participated last week, what stood out from walking through the keynote and listening to how to put together, looking at the slide deck. And you had a keynote template down here to use as well, which I'm assuming most people haven't gone back to build it. But what were some key takeaways and questions when we went through building your keynote?
I thought one of the greatest things about it was a lot of these things, people give you a template and they build something around the way they do it or around them. You are very, very careful to make sure people build this around who they are and how they operate. We're not you. And you recognize that, and you know we can't do it exactly your way. So I think you were really, really careful to make sure we input our personalities and our stories so that we really make it our own. And that was really, really beneficial and different.
Does anybody remember early on when we talked about why story is important in conveying information? And we showed the little image of a pill as the information and a dog in the background. We've had dogs, and giving them medicine and pills is hard, but you wrap it either in peanut butter or in cheese. So the story is the peanut butter and cheese for information that you want people to swallow, so to speak. How many remember some of the different kinds of stories everybody needs to have at their fingertips? What's kind of the first story out of the box?
Personal story.
Or what we call the origin story. How did you get into it's a little bit of your hero's journey as to why you're doing this. Why is this important to you? How did you come to this? Okay, that's good, Rob. All right.
I can tell you from my experience with Rex is that it's the relation. I mean, we are building relationships here, and the start point is being vulnerable first, because as soon as we're vulnerable, then that allows the other person who may be not willing to be vulnerable to now open up, and now we're relatable. Now we're able to really get into the meat and potatoes of what's going on. And it could be a change order on a project, or it could be, wow, I'm dealing with some stuff at home. There's all kind of things, but we've got to start to lay that groundwork of personal storing and being vulnerable.
Making it psychologically safe, connecting with the audience. Can you remember a story I may have told that showed a bit of personal side of what I do?
Well, how you're almost in ruin.
Oh yeah.
That's a huge element, right?
Yeah, financially, marriage-wise, relationally. Yeah, and this was in 2000 .com crash. Yes. So that's again part of the hero's journey side, is showing that I don't want to be the hero, but I want to show you that I have the credibility because I've gone through and paid the price to be here. That's part of that origin story. Then there are success stories, and these are success stories about people or clients. They have to be relevant to the audience. The similar kind of situation that somebody started here, they had this challenge, but here's what they went through, and here they are now. Another kind of story are your philosophy and the values that drive you to do what you do. A comeback story, and that's part of the personal story, and part of my origin story was a comeback story. The challenge we have when we go out and sell is we try to be the hero, or when we lead, we try to be the hero. Whoever you're helping can't put themselves in your shoe and say, well, you can do it, but I can't. That is a built-in problem with the current model of trainers. They're the experts on the information. They know what strategic means, and they know what strategic achiever looks like, and they know all of those things. And then what happens is that when the trainer leaves, then the manager says, well, I can't do that. I don't have time to do that. Actually, I've got a real job that I need to do. So that's part of how do we bring this down to a point where it's so easy that the threshold is so low that anybody can do it. All right. And the last kind of story that I shared was the insight story. How this gives you a window into your situation, your company's situation, having a story that can be similar to a success story. A success story's purpose is to show you that, yes, people use this and they do well with it. And we talk about the importance of your client is the hero, the person you're coaching is the hero, you want to be the guide. And in storytelling, the guide is the strongest character. The hero is usually a weak character, or a character in a crisis, or a character in over their head, or a character who doesn't really know themselves, or a character who makes stupid decisions. And there's this guide that comes by and helps the hero go through their journey to find out who they really are, to get the confidence they need, whatever it is, to not cave in under pressure. Those are the things. So remember, the hero is someone who's got a problem that they can't handle themselves. It was my big temptation in sales for years and years. I had all the answers, right? I'm here to fix it. The other problem too, if you're in the coaching situation, having the answers means that they're dependent on you, and you build a codependent relationship. A lot of coaches and doctors, psychologists, their buzz is to be indispensable. My whole drive is to be unessential. You need me now, but if you need me 5 years from now in the same capacity, then I've failed. And training models, whether it's CliftonStrengths or DISC or Enneagram or any of them, they're all built on the same platform. We have all this content. You take an assessment. We're here to unpack it. When you have a problem, we're here to interpret it for you. We don't want that. Let's go back to Keynote. Any other takeaways from Keynote? And then we'll go into the journey template.
Rex, I'll stop a moment. I was just grabbing my notes out of my drawer a minute. And I remember someone, I think it was during the story part, we were talking about different either superheroes or stories. So Spider-Man was an example as a hero in that whole story. But someone, I can't remember who it was, said, and I'm looking at my notes, that in the Harry Potter series, do you remember who said there were 5 words that changed Harry Potter's direction in his life? So Hagrid's in the first movie, I said to Harry Potter, you are a wizard. And that one really, I wrote it down because I thought that can be a great metaphor, an example of understanding who you are to release what you can really do.
Right.
And so I don't know if that was, I think it was right during story. It's in my notes along with storytelling.
I'm going to tie that to one of Kurt's strengths. I've watched him. He's the master in real time, pulling a book reference, a quote here. And I just go, how does he do that? But that's his strength working. Now, my Harry Potter moment was 8th grade, and it's in the book. My Harry Potter moment was when Mr. Rubidoux, 8th grade teacher, former strategic air commander in San Antonio, always wore a white shirt with his sleeves rolled up. I was having what I call a knucklehead year. I was a bit of a goof off. Part of that was to compensate for my learning and speech disabilities. But since I wasn't the great of anything, I was behind the scenes being the mischievous one. He threw me up against the locker, lifted me in the air, and I was all of 4'8" and 84 pounds at the time. I knew that because I wrestled. And he said, Miller, you've got too much going for you for me to see it go to waste. I'm going to be on your tail for the rest of the year. Now, outside of scaring the shit out of me and going limp in the air, that put a burning question in me that has driven me ever since. What is it that he sees? What do I have that's inside of me that he thinks is worth something? I never heard it like that before. That's a great metaphor. And I'm going to use this in the future. I look for these hooks. What was your Harry Potter moment growing up? Right? That was one of the hooks that he gave us. Another hook in the presentation is, when did you start playing it safe, or when did you feel other people's opinions were important and that got in your way of being yourself? And we talked about when. For me, it was 3rd grade. These are great questions to bring to people to open up conversations. Another tool we used is this story template. We opened up with this. What did you like about this? How did it help you? What kind of conversations were you guys having in your small groups?
I feel like it gave connection. We're in person for the first time, like everybody's mentioned, but at the same time, it was like, oh, there's a lot more to this person than just what I see through Zoom. I was with Josh, Story, and Joseph, just seeing them talk and the struggles they've had and stuff. It really made that connection, and I saw more in them than just through Zoom.
That's great. Any other takeaways? And I'll unpack the design of this, how I design these. I use different ones for different groups, but they still follow a similar format. The comment is, at the end, this group gelled so quickly. Getting a group to gel is so important. This is my main go-to. I had a group of people from across the country come to the ranch for 2 days on the future of work. Many of these people knew one another as acquaintances in the industry, but the comment was, this group bonded, and of staying together, and they felt like we did so quickly. Well, that just doesn't happen by accident. And it doesn't happen just by picking good people. That's part of it. But I've had it with construction teams that are having trouble. So part of the design here, number one, it's a template. So everybody has the same roadmap. The second part of it is there's no right or wrong. You fill out as much as you want. You can skip anything. It's whatever you're comfortable with. The third part is the sequence. We start with childhood, favorite memories, and then we move into where you get energized, the energy side, what you get motivated, excited about, and then something special about you. I am the go-to person for this, and then a specific part of it. Here's a career highlight. But then we want to get to the vulnerability side. One of the biggest challenges I overcame. And people shared some amazing challenges they went through. And some people I've known for a while that I didn't know some of the struggle they went through. Then inviting people into that vulnerability, one thing I could use help with. And then moving into, okay, so top of mind issues. What keeps you up at night? What gets you up in the morning? And then an aspiration for our time together. Depending on the kind of opening or the kind of engagement, if there's conflict involved, I will have some things related to that. This was developed, as if you remember the story, by a group that works with abused and at-risk kids in tough neighborhoods to help them deal with their trauma. And I won't go into the background because we did that in the workshop, but this is one of the go-to tools. If you go to the website, rexmiller.com, I've got several examples of these that you can download. I use one for the holidays, for Thanksgiving. The first time I used it, the kids said, "Dad, what are you doing? This is not a workshop." But I gave everybody the template. Normally, the conversation around the mealtime was not very deep, and it was not, didn't have a rhythm to it. And it was, the meal was over with in 30 minutes. And then we went and sat in the living room. The first time we were at the dinner table for 2 hours, just having fun, talking, because it's not that we followed the script. It was what the script opened up, people sharing humorous moments about one another, memories, things they think were special about each other. It was a great time. If you go to rexmiller.com, it's on the product site. It's free. We created one for the George Floyd event because I was working with a lot of companies in the Bay Area, tech companies, and it was just a very polarizing time and people didn't know how to navigate around that. So we created a story template that would not deal with that issue specifically, but things that are traumatic and controversial. What do you remember about the go-to strength exercise? I just did this yesterday with a group, and it was a 90-minute, what I call a discovery session. And at the last minute, I said, I'm going to throw out the slide deck and just use the app and see what a complete workshop would look like just living in the app. And I'll give you a little demo of that. And it was awesome because it was engaging and they were the ones creating the conversations. The go-to exercise is very simple. It's simply, what's your go-to strength and why? If the team knows each other, then other members of the team can respond to that. I posted what I called the director's cuts on ring descriptions. So right now, all we have access to is a brief paragraph summary of the rings. That's the 4-zone system where you drop 5 strengths into the 4 zones and they create patterns. Those patterns create archetypes or leadership styles. I also use this to help me imagine what movie character they might find. So when we did the movie character exercise, what do you remember the reason why I do that? And what did you take away from
I felt like it allows a language for the group to relate to each person and how their strengths show up for their strengths, but also maybe that's also the kryptonite side of things. One thing we noticed was being aware of the group's knowledge of the character, because if it was a character that somebody hadn't heard of, it was hard to relate. Knowing the age or the pop culture that people know.
I'm working on coming up with a range of characters for each archetype that you can use, that you can give somebody, start with these and pick one of your own and give me the backstory to it. Part of the reason I do it is because it feeds my learner input side, and it just tests me on how good I am at picking things. In some cases, it gets very, very even spooky close to getting there. So how many grew up with nicknames? Who had nicknames?
My siblings couldn't say Nathan, so they said Nene. And then my
Nene.
dad would always
Okay.
call me Natron after the quarterback.
Okay, great. Natron. Yeah. Who else had a nickname?
My grandpa called me Blonde Bomber, and I ended up using that when I played roller derby.
I remember back in the day when roller derby was on black and white TV on Saturdays, there was the Blonde Bomber. I remember that one.
Hold the presses. Heather, you did roller derby?
Yes.
What a badass. That is cool.
Yeah, and that's a new thing we know about Heather. So what was your favorite move? Was it the hip check or the sling shot?
I was the jammer, so I was trying to get through everybody. And so my favorite move was when I went out to Amarillo and the girls were grass-fed and intimidating. So I just got really, really low and would sneak by them, and they were like, I can't get that low to hit her legally. So that was probably my favorite move.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
Grass fed. That's great.
Yeah. So I think you've got a new nickname for the group.
Blonde Bomber.
Well, so one roller derby team that I played with called me Blondie, and the other roller derby team out of Arizona said that doesn't work with roller derby, so they called me Bomber.
And this didn't come out during the retreat at all.
Didn't.
That's amazing.
Hey, Rex,
I know.
who was the Blonde Bomber? Do you remember her name?
No.
Jody Weston. Jody Weston.
Okay. So who's Jody Weston outside of the Blonde
She was the Blonde Bomber back in the day. Like, say, you and I are the same age. We watched roller derby. So anyway, I think it was Jody Weston. I can't remember what I had for breakfast, but why do I remember that?
That is a great question. That's something we could spend an hour exploring that. All right.
Nathan's searching for an image, right?
The reason we do the movie characters and the nicknames, that's part of a high-performing team. There's a role you play. There's a character you play. There's two elements to this. There is the archetype, the character that you identify with, but then there's that aspirational side as well. The Greeks called these characters heroes. And a hero was somebody who had strength for two. They were protectors and had strength for two. So when you take your strengths and your pattern, and at my best, where does that hero side show up? What does it look like? And then who are some examples of that I look up to? So if you remember the exercise we had, it could be family members, it can be a teacher, it can be whoever, but capturing these and connecting them to who you are at your best, that gives you a mental image. In coaching people all the time, they hear certain voices in their head, their mother or a coach. Sometimes it's negative voices they hear, which we have to reprogram them out. There's another side to this, and it's called the alter ego effect. That's different than the hero character. The alter ego is somebody or a character that allows you to be more than what you would normally allow yourself to be in a public situation. So Beyonce, for example, has Sasha Fierce. She just puts on that persona. Actors all the time. Think of it as method acting. they take on that persona. When Michelle, our daughter, was growing up, she has autism. So if I gave her a character to play, it would look like she had that social intelligence side because she was playing a character. And not coincidentally, Renaissance Festival, she's been doing that for several years and plays characters. She's comfortable playing roles, but she's not always comfortable being herself. I've got several alter egos. One is if I do public speaking, I say, I'm going to put my Jim Rohn on today. And if you don't know who Jim Rohn is, you can look him up, but he's a very folksy storytelling. He's not your Tony Robbins type of on-stage presence. If I need to write, I've read all of Stephen Pressfield's books, and I'll just get into his mindset if I need to write. What it does is it quiets the negative self-talk that gets in the way of your doing what you want to do. And it gets you into a mindset. So it's a little neuro hack called Alter Ego Effect. I've got a couple books on it.
The hero versus the alter ego is the idea that the hero embodies characteristics that you also embody versus the alter ego is someone to channel and emulate. Is that the difference between the two? Because you make the distinction, but I want to make sure I understand.
Think of the hero as someone you look up to that you'd like to be one day. You were a kid, you looked up to, there were certain tennis players that I looked up to and that I bought their tennis racket, I wore their shoes. I would try to hold the racket the way they did because I was inspired to be more like them. That's the hero. And it can be, like I said, a family member or anybody. The alter ego, the goal is to quiet the self-talk and to channel energies to allow you to be more than what you typically allow yourself to be. It allows you to take more risk. A funny story about Bo Jackson. So Bo Jackson used to get in trouble because his temper would get him in trouble on the playing field. He'd get penalties or even get kicked out. And he took on the persona of Jason from Friday the 13th because he was a killing machine, but dispassionate. So he wanted to be a killing machine on the field, so to speak, but not let his temper get so overblown that he would get in trouble. And actors use this all the time. Actors, musicians put themselves in the mindset of an alter ego. Today was meeting a few new people, catching up, and looking at last week, some of the things we went through. Any comments or questions?
Still can't thank you enough for all you and everybody did for last week. That was just really transformational and cool to see you and your environment.
Yeah, that was fun to have you guys.
I will agree with Stan. The transformational and the connection was very moving.
So do you think we should do another one next year?
We have to wait a year.
There's the blonde bomber.
I have to wait a year.
Yeah, Rex can't handle it.
Maybe we look at doing something in the spring.
If you need help planning it, leverage the strengths of the group.
Now that you've all been baptized in the process. And again, thank you. It was an incredible time. There's just no other way to say it. And that's because everybody was present the whole time, highly engaged, and I appreciate it. All right, next week, we're going to dive into Teachable. And if Maddie's with us, I'll be tapping her shoulder a lot because she is the creator of all things Teachable.